This is Open to Hope Radio, featuring Dr. Gloria Horsley and her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley, coming to you on behalf of the Open to Hope Foundation, dedicated to those who are looking for hope after loss. Now, here's Dr. Gloria.
Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we're going to have some great guests today, and they are involved with the Compassionate Friends. And this show is brought to you in partnership with the Compassionate Friends, and that they're the largest grief and loss organization in the world, right, Heidi?
Absolutely, and I don't think a lot of people realize that there are almost 1 million members of the Compassionate Friends. Mm-hmm. They are an organization devoted to helping people that have had siblings die, children die, and grandchildren die, and to help all of us to find hope after loss.
Mm-hmm. And there are over 700 chapters in the United States, so really look for one in your neighborhood. And hey, if you're 18 months out, you can open one yourself, right, Heidi?
Absolutely.
Yeah, just get a hold of them at thecompassionatefriends.org. Heidi, why don't you tell us our audience more about Anne and Jeff?
Well, Anne and Jeff are very good friends of mine, so I'm thrilled to have them here. They are both involved in Compassionate Friends. Anne, conference chair for the Compassionate Friends this year, and we're going to have it in Phoenix, Arizona. And they came to this organization, and we met because, unfortunately, their son, Tony, died at 24 years old of a medical error. And they have since gone on to start the Tony Brown Foundation, and they help many people every year to help, find hope after loss through their foundation.
Let's talk a little bit about Tony. And why don't you tell us a little bit about who Tony was?
Oh, my goodness. It's interesting because last night I actually watched Tony's memorial service for the first time in years. We were showing it to our friend Mitch, and it just kind of really resonated again. It was an easier thing to watch, and it was Tony was stubborn, came up an awful lot. He was a determined child, kind, good-hearted, sarcastic, and loved extreme sports. He had no fear, felt no pain. Great kid, had a very good future ahead of him, was looking forward to getting married, having kids, and go on to film extreme sports. That was his passion.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And now he had a blood disease, too,
He
right?
did, yes.
Just ironically, a very rare disease.
Yeah, it's called TTP, and he came down with that out of nowhere. He was a very healthy boy, and it was in January of 2009. They had found him unconscious in his dorm room. And he almost died then. He was in a coma, and he suffered short-term memory loss after he came out of it. He was out of school for 2.5 months, and, they thought he was okay. It was kind of disease where you can live with it. He had to take a lot of precautions. And then he came down with a very bad episode, but they were sending him home and told him how he'd have to live his life and carry an EpiPen with antibiotics in it, pretty much. And he unfortunately, things went wrong when he was going home, and he never did make it out.
And Jeff, I was talking to you a little bit earlier about the fact that you're a stepdad.
Yes.
And, sometimes I think people are a little callous with stepdads. Oh, you're the stepdad.
Yeah, I think step-parents oftentimes get a bum rap, let's say. I know, it's a tough position. I knew Tony when he was 6 and 7 years old, and he grew up with me. He didn't know his biological dad very well. And but a lot of people, you hear that, step-parents, well, you're the step-parent. You don't have
How's your wife doing?
a bond. Yeah, how's your wife? It's always, how's your wife? And my grief is very different than my wife's grief. But when you have a child who's 6 and 7 years old and you go through preteen and teen and college and all, we never, in our house, I am the stepdad. I was the stepdad, but I don't think the boys ever thought about it that way. And I don't think Tony ever, he didn't even think it wasn't even a thought.
All right. So there were 3 boys in the family, and
Three
Tony was the youngest.
Yes.
Yeah. Heidi, that reminds me of, you having an adopted child, too.
Well, absolutely. And Jeff adopted Tony. And, I always say our kids come to us in many ways. We don't have to be biologically connected to be their parent. And I think, Jeff is a perfect example of that because he was Tony's dad. And I think that, people tend to minimize and think, okay, you need to be related by blood. And, my husband's not related by blood, and I still love him. a lot. So, I mean, like I said, my daughter, I love my daughter as much as my son, and she's not biologically connected to me. She's not related to me that way.
So I think we need to be sensitive to people about their relationships. As you were saying, Jeff, he didn't have a relationship with his own dad. So, I mean, they could, we just get confused. I mean, it really is, how has it been for you having this loss is the question.
It's devastating. I don't think there would have been any difference if I was his biological dad or not. You have this person that you know every molecule about, and then they go for whatever reason. They're not with us anymore, and as you said before, the community, even friends and relatives, the step parent stigma does come through. Not always up front, but I know it's there, and. But because in our tight-knit family, that wasn't an issue, I just, it was out of my thoughts. I didn't think
And you made
about
that comment, well, I didn't grieve like Anne, and I think that gets into that male-female thing, right?
Oh, I didn't understand her grief fully, and she didn't understand mine.
And there was a time where I truly, and I felt horrible about this, and it took a writing. I was journaling, and I wrote, and I realized I had like this grief stepladder. And unfortunately, because Jeff was a stepdad, it was mine and my children were first. I didn't realize, and then it came whoever I thought needed to grieve a certain way was next, whether it was my parents or Jeff, but it was me and my children were up there on the top. And when I suddenly put that realization together, I was like, oh my God, I'm doing such an injustice to Jeff, because Tony did look at him as a dad. Their dad had died from cancer a while back, and he was their dad. So it took a lot of inward looking to realize that he suffered this loss with me.
Yeah. And how long did it take? Do you remember when you realized that?
It was about 2-3 years out. I think I realized it 2 years out, but before I could truly act on it took about 3 years.
Well, I think that after you've had the death of a child, which we all have, of someone before their time, you really appreciate other people, because you're just like, wow, I mean, people can die. And I don't take my relationships for granted anymore. I don't take my sibling relationships and my relationship with my parents and my relationship with now my own children for granted. Every day I'm just thankful to have them in my lives. Right. I mean, here Tony he was larger than life. And I think it's very ironic the way he died, because he was an extreme sports guy in the prime of his life, doing all these flips and all these things and all these skiing, and he was fine, and then he goes and has some crazy medical error, and that's how he dies. You just would never, ever have expected that all of a sudden he was going to be gone.
Right. Yeah. And it did. It took a toll on both of us. And to this day, I see Jeff cry. He actually cries more than I do. He will well up watching movies or talking about Tony quicker than I do, which really touches my heart, because I know that love with a step-parent even goes so deep,
Yeah. Well, you folks lived around Sandy Hook, the next town over?
Yeah.
And we were talking about a little bit. What were some of your observations? Because how long had it been since Tony died?
3 years.
Okay.
So it was 3 years. It'll be 3 years in December, and so it was about 3.5 years after Tony died. It was interesting. I was working in a bakery department of a grocery store at the time, and you started to see people come in with those blank stares on their faces. And having gone through it, I was able to recognize that stare, and they'd be looking around trying to find something. And I told my manager, I said, we need to do something. I said, because these people are going to be coming into our stores. They're like, we can't talk to them. Don't bring it up. Don't mention it. That's John's dad. He came in every day. We can't. I'm like, yes, we have to. You have to talk to these people. So I felt like I was in a good place, because I was able to educate the whole store on how to help these people. Don't shy away from them. Don't run away to the back when they come in. Talk to them. Mention their child's name. And that was a blessing that I felt I was able to give back. But the community itself, it was interesting, because it was such a national event. It was they were isolated. They didn't want to go out in public. They didn't want any help at the time. And I totally understand that. They were leery. They were concerned. But the community as a whole, you started to see, Some bereaved people were a little bit angry because what about my child? We had people who were coming to Compassionate Friends meetings the same month who had just lost a child.
Yeah.
And one gentleman buried his daughter on the day of Sandy Hook. And he said, it just was overshadowed, his whole daughter's event, because the whole world was grieving for these, rightfully so, for all these children. And here he was burying his daughter. So it
Yeah.
was kind of, being so close to it, a lot of people felt that it overshadowed their own grief. So we had a lot of people. It stirred up a lot of emotions.
Monroe and Newtown are very tightly knit. We're next to each other. Most of the people or a large number of people that I grew up and went to school with live in Newtown. Newtown is broken off into Sandy Hook is like a sub part of their village that's literally 3 miles from our house. And so there was firemen and policemen and just regular old families. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew somebody, a parent or a grandparent or a first responder in the case of that, because there were, when that occurred, Monroe, fire rescue and police and all they were there, immediately. And just so happens we had a empty middle school, which I happened to go to 8th grade in. And we had built a new school, and this school had sat dormant for a couple of years. And the option of using Sandy Hook School again was gone. That can't be. And so they took care of that separately. And so it was really wonderful the way it went through. Monroe and Newtown came together, and they opened up the school and re-energized it and got it ready to accept students. But what they did was they went into Sandy Hook School, and every room that they could, the kids' cubbies where their shoes are kept or their coats or their lunch boxes, every one of those rooms was transferred over to the Monroe building.
Oh my gosh.
That's amazing.
The numbers on the doors, the colors of the rooms. So when these little kids walked in,
I've never heard this
the transition was as best that it could be. We took the other name. It was Chalk Hill Middle School for Monroe's use, but it became the Sandy Hook School.
That's incredible.
And I really have to commend the Newtown, Monroe, and State Police, because they really protected the parents and the families of those kids. Because the media, the inundation of the media when Sandy Hook happened was
like hiding in the bushes.
Every 5 minutes, a satellite truck from New York or wherever would be coming by our house. And the center of Sandy Hook, which is literally an eye dry, it's this little tiny place, was inundated with media.
Well, and it's like the whole community was traumatized.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And re-traumatized.
Right.
And the amount of traffic, even when I was there, was gridlock.
Yeah.
I remember the night it happened, poor Jeff sitting next to me, and I'm like, we have to go help. Like, I wanted to put on my clothes and go do something.
Yeah, everyone did. All over the United
Exactly.
States. What can we do?
And, then you're sitting there, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Bringing a stuffed animal may make me feel better. But in the reality, I think my efforts were better in the background, helping people understand how to help.
Coincidentally, we were having our Toys for Tots drive at the time.
Okay.
And a very close friend of mine that I grew up with, his son-in-law is a fire lieutenant, I believe, in Sandy Hook Fire Department, which is literally across the street from the school. And they had so many teddy bears sent to the town from everywhere.
I heard that.
They finally couldn't put them anymore. The post office was storing them and other people, and we ended up with hundreds of teddy bears for our Toys for Tots.
Wow.
Brought up by the fire department because they had, you want somebody to benefit from them.
Exactly.
Right.
So all the people drove from all over to bring stuffed animals, so that a child did get to use those animals after they did their memorials on the side of the road.
So I love it. You did impact in that background. I think the background is so important. It's not about you. It's about what they need. Heidi, I just wanted you, before we close the show, to talk about how you educated the people that were working with the firefighter families, because even your team that was going to go in and help the firefighters didn't understand a lot about grief and loss of the families, right?
Well, I think that they were worried about going in, and they were scared about going into a grieving home, the clinical team, because they didn't know what they were going to find, and they waited. We did not start going into homes of firefighter families that had a death for 6 months because we were fearful that we were going to be part of the problem because there was so much media and so many people trying to get, in touch with all these 9/11 victims. But the problem was they needed us from day one because they needed us to help them navigate all these people that were trying to get to them, all this media.
Right.
They needed someone that they trusted. They needed someone that understood the grief process. And so, in hindsight, my advice is if someone has a loss and if someone, has just had a loss, they often need people that understand grief and loss that have been there right at the beginning to help them navigate the waters, because when it's a public event, there is so much media and so many people, and they're not always there for the right reasons.
So I want to say before we close the show, I think one of the things that we're talking about right now is how we do grieve in community, but also being sensitive to what the needs of the community are. And you don't have to be right on the front lines to give and help.
Right.
You can be back there. You can be back there taking Toys for Tots. You can be back there doing other things. You don't have to be, again, on the front line. But also what it says to me is that service is so important, right? Anne and Tony,
Yes.
I know
Oh, yeah.
when you're ready to give service to other people.
Yeah,
We held
giving
an
is a very healing.
open house grief resource awareness day in February, which Heidi had come to, and Alan Peterson. We had a whole bunch of people come in, Reiki, acupuncture. We had books just so the community could start to understand about grief, how to help those that are grieving, and that the Sandy Hook community could come anonymously and pick up what they needed and find the resources they needed. We didn't need to be out there in the open waving our arms and going, we're going to be here to help you, but just putting it out there so that they knew they could find what they needed at
Quietly.
the time.
We assured them that they would be anonymous. If they happened to be from Newtown or Sandy Hook, they were just another grieving parent.
Right.
We weren't going to, put a spotlight on them.
Yeah, I mean, being to service is, it's just amazing to me.
It's
We do
extremely
memorial
healing.
blood drives every year for Tony's birthday because he had
Oh,
a blood
nice.
disease. Anyway, we do, the random acts of kindness, and gratitude is something that has truly transformed my grief journey.
What advice could you give to our listeners?
First, to try to take care of yourself. We find that, and people say it all the time, when you're at the funeral service or the wake, the grieving family ends up comforting the people walking in. They ask them how they're doing. And it's for people who haven't experienced it, they're at a loss. They don't know what to say. They sometimes just become silent because they don't know what to say.
So just
And to-
showing up works.
Yeah, you don't have to, you can't fix it. So just somebody there to listen with that person may just be enough.
Yeah.
Your hand on their shoulder.
And I would just say, have hope, have faith, be patient and kind. It's the hardest thing, any type of loss, that we have is our hardest loss that we're going through. And have that hope and try to just find something in your life that you can hold on to. And it will get gentler. It will get a little bit softer. But the biggest thing that helped me was a shift when I started to live my life with Tony. I realized that I needed to start incorporating Tony into my life rather than mourning his loss. And once I did that, my life changed.
All right.
The more you can live with your child, even though they're no longer physically with us, I think you'll find that your journey is a little bit easier because they're always with us.
Now, how do we find the Tony Brown Foundation online?
Online, it's www.thetonybrownfoundation.org.
All right. Well,
Thank you so much, and thanks for all you guys do. You do so much, and you really are keeping Tony's memory alive, and he is doing as much in his death as he's doing in his life, as he did in his life, to change the world through the work you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Yes.
thanks for listening to the show today. And Heidi and I always want to say to you, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
You've been listening to Open to Hope Radio, hosted by Doctors Gloria and Heidi Horsley. Like today's edition, all of our past programs are available on demand at opentohope.com, along with helpful articles, videos, resources, and links to help get you through the toughest time of your life. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Again, that's opentohope.com. Check it out today. Then be sure to stop by next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we'll be posting another edition of Open to Hope Radio. Remember, others have been where you are. They made it through, and you can too, as long as you're open to hope.